We did not expect the 401st species to fail. In 400 years, none of them had. The trial does not measure strength, and it does not measure intelligence. It measures obedience under isolation, and every species we had ever tested understood, eventually, that obedience was the answer the room wanted. The 401st species did not fail. It broke the room. The trial notice we sent to the species designated human read, in full. Subjects will be separated. No coordination permitted. Compliance will be evaluated on individual conduct. Non-compliance by any subject affects evaluation of all subjects. This is the same notice we have sent 400 times, translated 400 times into languages that all eventually converge on the same shape. Obey or the others suffer for you. High Adjudicator Thren presented the notice himself, because he presents all of them himself, because in 400 years he has never once needed to revise the delivery. He smiled through the translation membrane the way he always smiles. Not unkindly, the way a teacher smiles at a student who has not yet learned the lesson everyone eventually learns. They will resolve into hierarchy within the first hour, he told the observation deck. They always do. 6 humans were separated into 6 isolation cells, unable to see or hear one another, each told that the other's treatment depended on their individual behavior. This is the entire trial. There is no weapon in it. There is no test of strength. There is only the isolation and the lie about consequence and 400 years of species who chose to comply because compliance felt safer than trust. The observation deck was silent for the first 11 minutes, the way it always is, because 11 minutes is roughly how long it takes a species to exhaust its instinct toward defiance and settle into the shape the room expects. At minute 12, a human began tapping on the isolation wall in a rhythm that was not random. Velson had watched 381 trials from the archive gallery, cataloging outcomes nobody above her rank would ever read again. She noticed the tapping before Thren's analysts flagged it as a violation. "They're not signaling for help," she said to no one who was listening. "They're passing time in base 4, that's a counting system." They built a counting system in the first 12 minutes, assuming someone was listening on the other side. Nobody above her rank found this significant. A counting system was not cooperation. A counting system was noise. Velson logged it anyway, because a species that assumes it is being listened to and starts building a language for the listener is not a species preparing to obey in isolation. It is a species preparing to not be isolated, whether or not isolation is what was offered. Cell block, hour 2. Kareth, behavioral analyst, was the one who noticed the second anomaly because it was in her domain and she had been mocked for her domain before. 3 years earlier, she had published a paper arguing that isolation trials could not distinguish compliance from strategy in any species capable of theory of mind above a threshold the Accord had never bothered to define. The paper was filed as speculative. Kareth had not been invited to present it. She watched 6 humans, unable to communicate, independently begin behaving as though they were being watched by allies, not captors. One conserved food. One mapped the cell's dimensions by pacing, muttering numbers. One slept in shifts of exactly the same duration, as if maintaining a rotation with people she could not see or hear. Kareth stopped taking notes and sat down on the observation bench because her legs had stopped feeling like they wanted to hold the rest of her up. "They are not waiting to be told what the others are doing," she said. "They're each acting as if the others can see them acting well. They built the coordination assuming it before we gave them any reason to assume it." Archive Gallery, hour 3. Ussa, protocol historian, went further back than either of them had thought to look. She pulled the trial's founding documentation, 406 years old, authored by a single adjudicator whose species had gone extinct 2 centuries ago, in a war the Accord no longer discussed. The trial was built to measure one thing, Ussa said, in one species. A species that treated isolation as a threat because their whole civilization was organized around visible hierarchy. Obedience was the rational choice for them because for them, being unwatched was the punishment. She set the document down carefully, the way a person sets down something they are afraid of dropping. We never revalidated it. 400 years, and we never asked whether every species since then simply happened to share that psychology, or whether the trial only ever selected for species that did. Cell block, hour 4. The 6th human, the youngest, by the Accord's estimate of the species' aging pattern, began deliberately breaking a minor trial rule. In full view of the observation sensors she could not have known were there, and immediately signaled apology toward the wall, toward nothing, toward whoever might be listening. Velson understood before Kareth said it aloud. She's testing whether the rule matters more than the relationship. She's answering a question we never asked her. Thren called for early designation before the trial's standard A-tower window closed. This had happened 4 times before, always for species that failed so completely the remaining hours were a formality. He filed the 401st for the same reason, though the report he submitted did not use the word failure. It used the word anomalous, which in Accord protocol carries the same quarantine consequence and considerably less scrutiny. The Council would convene in 6 hours to ratify the designation. Once sealed, a quarantine designation cannot be appealed. This is not policy, it is architecture. The Archive's own record-keeping systems purge a sealed species' raw trial data on ratification, keeping only the summary judgment. Velson would have 6 hours to make her case, and after that, there would be nothing left to make it with. She did not feel fear. She felt something closer to the sensation of finally understanding a shape she had been looking at sideways for 381 trials. The Council chamber does not permit raw data, only certified summary. Velson brought raw data anyway, because she had spent 4 hours confirming that the certified summary Thren had already filed did not contain the tapping, the shift sleeping, or the apology. Thren opened with the record he always opens with: 400 successful trials, 0 prior anomalies of this classification. 19 minutes. He did not raise his voice because he had never needed to. Velson had 4 minutes by chamber rule to respond. She used 40 seconds of it in silence, letting the tapping recording play. Base 4 counting, patient, assuming a listener that did not yet exist. They built trust into a system designed to prevent it, she said. 400 years of subjects complied with isolation because isolation frightened them into obedience. This species did not comply. It behaved as though connection was true even when unproven, and it did that inside a trial specifically engineered to make connection cost something. She let the youngest human's apology gesture play next, the second and final piece of raw data the chamber rule allowed her. The trial calls this anomalous. I call it evidence that our baseline was never universal. It was one species psychology, wearing 400 years of confirmation because we never once tested the test. Thren's rebuttal was immediate, and for the first time in the hearing, precise rather than dismissive. He cited the founding documentation's original validation cohort, 17 species, all converging on hierarchy compliance within the trial's first 90 minutes. It was a fair point. It was, Velson admitted silently, the strongest thing he had said all day. Then Ussa's testimony followed, and the 17 species in the validation cohort turned out to share a documented trait Thren's own citation had buried in a footnote. All 17 were, at the time of validation, client species of the same founding adjudicator's home government. The cohort was not representative. It had never been representative. It was politically convenient, 406 years ago, and no one since had checked. The chamber's murmur was the closest the council ever comes to sound of any kind breaking. Thren did not answer for 11 seconds, long enough that everyone in the chamber understood it was not a pause for effect. Then he asked, quietly, whether the raw trial data was still intact for all 400 prior species, or only for the ones filed within the last decade. It was the first question in the hearing that was not rhetorical. It was the first time in 400 years he had asked one. The council did not ratify the quarantine. It suspended it, pending review, the closest thing the Accord's law has to an admission of uncertainty, which is itself a kind of history being made in a chamber that had not made new history in centuries. Thren's official statement to the archive was 3 sentences long, cited the suspension, and recommended procedural review of trial methodology going forward. It was, Velson thought, exactly as bloodless as everything else he had filed in 400 years. The transmission he sent her afterward privately was not official. There was a silence before he spoke, nearly 4 seconds, which for Thren was the equivalent of visible hesitation. I built my career on a floor I never once tested for cracks, he said. That is not a comfortable thing to say to a third cataloger. Another pause. What your species did was not defiance. It was audacious. In the specific sense the word has fallen out of use for, it assumed a truth the room had not offered it, and then acted correctly on that assumption anyway. I do not know how many of the other 400 deserved the same chance to be seen that way. I am no longer certain any of them didn't. Velson did not answer him that night. She spent it instead in the archive's lower level, where the sealed summary files of the first 100 quarantine species were stored, and began, alone, pulling the raw trial data that had not yet been purged. The recordings, the gestures, the small, unwitnessed acts of species who might have been building languages for listeners no one told them were there. By morning, she had reopened 4 files. 396 remained. She did not think of it as finishing something. She thought of it, if anything, as having finally found the actual first question, the one the Accord should have asked 400 years and 400 species ago, and was only now, for the first time, prepared to ask again.